Hey, welcome to another episode of The Deep Dive, in which we seek to look at the passage or topic of focus from the weekend and just take a deeper look, have conversations around it, ask questions, try to ask more questions maybe than even find answers. But my name is Brad, and I'm joined today by Dan Borth.
Hello.
Also, if you're listening to this won't resonate with you, but if you're watching on YouTube, it might. Every week, I feel like the camera or the table or our chairs are in like a slightly different spot. And that kind of messes with me a little bit for the first couple minutes because I'm like,
no, I set the height of this table and I'm easily, 4 or 5 inches shorter than you.
Yeah.
So this feels great for me.
Yeah. Anyway, hey, we're releasing this a couple days later. Last week, our staff got an opportunity to go out to Redemption Ranch, local partner.
Yeah.
And
shout out.
Yeah, I had some time of worship, some time of prayer, reflection, just really good group time being together the last couple months. A lot's been going on, and just having a space to separate was really helpful. And then, so for the sake of this, a lot of the stuff we work on week in, week out kind of got shifted a little bit. So we're recording this actually on Monday, the day after. Dan, you preached 3 times this weekend. And
I tried 3 times. Yes.
Tried to. I'd love to just ask you this question just as a start. This is real like housekeeping, practical. You know, you're preaching now on a very regular basis.
Yeah.
Probably more regular than you ever have.
Yes.
And doing the message 3 times in a weekend, you're probably getting 3 different experiences. What's that like for the preacher, for the person on the stage?
Sure.
Yeah.
Man, thank you for asking. I am finding that one of the most important things to do is to find, there are elements where we try to be professional, but to find a personal, way of connecting and a personal way of delivering the message. And so it is interesting here at the Mid-Rivers campus, at least, each service is very different. Like the way each group of people tends to react is, I don't want to say predictable, but it is unique, and sometimes it shifts. And so communicating is always communicating, and so I find I like that challenge. I love that. I think the thing for me that I feel, at least today, that I feel like, I'm really young in this. And so my weaknesses, I think, are probably amplified. If I don't do something well going into the weekend, that probably reverberates a bit more. So there's lots of points of learning and connection, to be made and growth. But I behind the scenes of our teaching and preaching is kind of a cool arrangement that I really like and I value. Pastor Chris at St. Charles, he has organized our teaching team well. And so each week we're not only preparing material and concepts together, but we do get to review our sermons, and we get to hear back from other communicators, what went well, what we could work on. And I love that. It feels familiar. It feels like baseball to me. Baseball, you get up, you have your at bat.
As long as there's not a lockout, you do.
Well, I know. This is me projecting if baseball were happening right now. But yeah, it's like you get a couple at bats, in a game, or a couple reps in a weekend, and then you get to step back and then hear from other players and coaches and go back to the cage and work on stuff. And so I like it. It's healthy. It's the healthiest I've experienced and seen. And this is why the deep dive, I think, is so valuable too, because any given Sunday, what we share on a weekend is, it's a good percentage, but it's far from 100% of what we find out and discover as we're looking through these texts and talking these things through. And so I could keep going on that, but
no, it is good. I do love our process that we have. We have a team made up of more than the people who are actually just preaching on the weekend.
That's right.
We end up discussing things that make it in, then don't make it in. The deep dive is a further spot to explore some of those things as well, and how it relates to where we're at in this story. I I know I've read Jacob's story many times, experienced different versions of the Sunday school class, Sunday school version of Jacob's story.
Yeah.
And this is a section of his story that I don't think I've really ever spent much time on. I know I've read it. I've read it. I've had graduate level classes that have involved discussing this on some level, but I find myself in a story like this often getting lost.
Yeah.
Because there's these like high moments. I mean, everyone, Jacob and Esau, and Jacob and his mom, and then Jacob preparing and going back to be confronted and greeted by Esau again, and wrestling with God. Like, we have those like high points in his story as like kind of like postmarkers, and then this one specifically in Genesis 30 and 31, where he's kind of getting ready to prepare to leave. He spent some time, working for Laban. This one I get real lost in the weeds.
Yeah. Well, and there's some strange things in here. There's things that when you're reading it, I think you're allowed to like get the sense of this wasn't really written for me. There was some logic here that made a lot of sense, I'm assuming, to the original readers. Like, after they declare they're going out and Laban kind of messes Jacob over and separates the flock and ... It talks about Jacob shaving certain kinds of sticks and laying those by the troughs of water. And that it's when you read it, it sounds like almost a magical kind of thing. Although I think what it's pointing to is he was just a very shrewd shepherd, and he knew that if he, had a sheep with spots mate with a sheep without spots, he would get a lamb with spots, and if he did 2 strong sheep, that would equal, So I think a little more familiar to us today would be the idea of like selective breeding. But back then, shaved poplar sticks, why not?
Yeah.
And then Rachel steals her father's gods, and it's like this small commentary and moves on, and their dialogue even is very protracted and long as they're coming to this agreement of how they won't harm each other. But
yeah.
I have an interesting touch point with this passage.
Actually, before we get there,
yes,
maybe just take like a 1-minute overview.
Okay.
Because this again, we're in Genesis 30 verses 25 through the end of
31,
chapter 31.
Yeah.
So there's a significant chunk of scripture here. It's and I do think that the best way that we can handle narrative is to keep a broad picture of the story rather than getting lost in the fine details.
Yeah, that's right.
So can you just give us just an overarching summary?
Yeah, so starting point and ending point. It starts, Jacob is living among Laban's family, married to his 2 daughters. If you have questions about polygamy, check the other deep dives. So marries his 2 daughters and now is working among Laban's family as it sounds like he has quite a bit of oversight over the flocks. And his 11 sons are born while they're there, and his 1 daughter. And where they end is back in Canaan, where he had set out from. If we'll remember, Isaac and Rebekah had sent Jacob out from Canaan to go east to find Laban. So he's been with Laban. He's going to return to Canaan. Where this picks up is after the birth of his 11th son, Joseph, and before they make it to Canaan successfully. And it kind of describes like the departure from Laban's family. And it's pretty messy, but that's the big picture.
Yeah. And so in this, God has definitely, he's been faithful to his promise, and he's blessed Jacob.
That's right.
Through Jacob, Laban and his family has developed quite a bit of wealth and has been blessed.
Yes.
And so now they're making, Jacob comes to this space where, hey, it's time to go home.
Yeah.
Let's make preparations so that we don't go home empty-handed, that, we get what I'm due for how I've been responsible, for this. And then Laban does Laban things.
He does. He does do Laban things. He Labanizes the situation.
He Labanizes the situation.
He sure does. Well, and I think, so we have that snippet, right? And if we step back 1 frame, what we see is that previous to this, Isaac was carrying the blessing. And Isaac's an interesting figure because in some ways he is kind of simply the bridge between, I'm not saying he's insignificant or nothing happens with him, but he is kind of a bridge between Abraham, where the blessing originated, and Jacob, where the blessing turns into the tribes. The really interesting thing in this is, if you read all of Genesis at one sitting, when Jacob leaves his home, he's walking away from the place that God had promised Abraham. And he's walking away, and there's this sense of he's the inheritor. He's supposed to be there and be the blessing, but he has to leave it in order to experience the blessing in a sense. And he comes back in a much different place. But all of his movements have much to do with the promises to Abraham, which have much more to do with God's promises to humanity in the larger scope.
Absolutely. All right, so you said you had a high point, unless that was it.
No, it's very obscure. When I was younger, I was encouraged to read Scripture, and so I did. And I think I tried to read through the Bible like cover to cover, So at some point in my early teens, I read through this story, and the piece that stuck out to me, like you mentioned, I mean, even as an adult, there's just a lot to get lost in. Well, as a younger kid, I didn't track with much of this, but at the end of the story, when Jacob builds the Galid, the pillar of witness, I latched onto that idea of a heap of witness, and that became my gamer tag on like Xbox and stuff like
that's
that.
Amazing.
I was Galid E2110, and the E2110 were tied to the New Testament. And at the time, that was back when everyone was still trying to make emails and gamer tags that had deep significance.
Yeah, your AOL.
That's right. That's right.
Your AIM handle. Oh, that's amazing.
But
that's amazing.
Most of my gamer tags now are much less glorious.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. One of the things I think that sticks out to me, especially at this point in the Jacob story, we don't have this much scripture devoted to Isaac.
Right.
Really, even Abraham has quite a bit, but rightfully so, right? He's the father of the faith for the Old Testament people. But I've often wondered why is there so much space devoted to Jacob and his story, and kind of even just in preparation for this, I was thinking about the line where it talks about Jacob recognizing. His contribution to Laban's wealth and prosperity. And I don't know, I just kept being reminded of Genesis 12 and the original call that God had for Abraham. And we quote it all the time, but hey, I'm going to bless you so that you will be the blessing, and the whole earth will be blessed. My name will be known. And, those who bless you, I'll bless, and those who curse you, I'll curse. Yeah. And this is a very tangible way or space where we're reminded of that blessing.
Yes.
And so then, even backtracking even more, and we've mentioned this on several episodes now.
We have an error message showing up on our screen. Are we okay?
How quickly did that? Yeah, we're okay.
We're okay.
We have 13 minutes left.
No error messages here anymore.
That's going to be a fun...
what did it say? Do we have low tire pressure?
Yeah, low space on the card left.
Oh, okay.
But we have enough space.
We're going to do it.
To do this. So
game on.
Anyway.
PTI, y'all.
So the question of who is this written to? Right? Yep. This was written to the people of God who are coming out of slavery, coming out of Egypt, and they are wrestling with their identity. Yep. They're wrestling with what does it look like to live in a way that God will be glorified. Yep. What does it look like to live in a way that is faithful to the promise that they have been given? What does it look like to live in a way that's faithful to that promise that also results in their further blessing? So there's all these things that are happening. And I guess the reflection I had was, well, at this time, the people of God are already separated into tribes, right? They have some tribal identity. Yes. Without maybe some of the bigger picture surrounding that tribal identity. Yes. And so I think a lot of this is not that Abraham's not important, not that Isaac isn't important, but maybe the most pressing question for them
that's right.
is, well, who are we as a family? We have these tribe names. What does that even mean? And then there's going to be a decent chunk of Genesis devoted to the life of Joseph, which basically tells the story of how they got to Egypt in the first place.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was just kind of a reflection I had. Recently.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, when Moses writing Genesis, when he asks God, who shall I say is sending me to your people? God's answer is, tell them the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so the movements of the people are just as important as their identity, their experiences with Yahweh, good or bad, the things that they learn along the way become... foreshadowing is not the right word, but it's a little bit like blue eyes runs in the family kind of thing, or quiet sullenness is a family trait. They're understanding something of themselves by their forefathers' experiences, which in this particular passage, I think is some of the dynamic that we see in what's written here and why it's written. A really obscure thing happens in the middle of this story. Leah and Rachel agree with Jacob that they need to leave, that Laban is not doing right by them. They agree that Yahweh is calling them to go back to Canaan, so they pack up. And it says in the middle of the packing up and the moving, I think it's chapter 31, and let me find it real quick. I can't find it. But it says that Rachel went in and took her father's household idols, and she packs them in their things, and then they travel away. There's a question, I think, that always haunts Israel. And it's, what are the people of God who know Yahweh? What's their fascination with idols? Why do they keep finding themselves choosing a lesser? It's just a lesser thing overall.
Well, it's the point that one of the Ten Commandments, right, is specifically names that.
That's right. But they always have difficulty. I mean, they have clear commands. They have clear, I think, advantage. They have much less religious obligation. Like it's just a much better thing that was prescribed for Israel in the Mosaic setup. But they love their idols. And I think, part of what this little snippet in this story is hinting at is that whether by intention or by ignorance, the worship of idols seems to always make its way back into Canaan. And that's not a celebrated thing. That's almost this foreshadowing of tension. What are Rachel's motivations? I don't know. Maybe she's getting back at her dad. Maybe she believes there's some power in them. Maybe she was hoping for another kid, and that's where her mind's at.
Yeah, maybe there's just sentiment, and it's like, grandma and grandpa's cookie jar that she just wants to, because she's getting ready to leave. Yeah, like leave her home. Yeah, probably never see family and friends again.
Okay, this here's a little bit of Dan's speculation, but you're pretty well studied in Scripture. So, is it possible that some of what in all of those things that are likely in the picture, the way the story goes, she takes the idols, they get to Gilead, and then Laban catches up, and Laban is pretty mad and starts looking for the idols. And Jacob says, if you find these idols, whoever took them will die, which clearly we know like that would be tragic because Jacob loves Rachel. And there's this very tense moment as Laban is searching. And Rachel decides to sit on top of her idols and claim that she's on her period so that her dad doesn't search the bags that she's sitting over.
It's a scripture, y'all.
It is scripture. And one of the bits of commentary that I checked in on, this might have been the ESV Study Bible, which was pretty succinct, but it did point out like there's this subtle thing that's happening that shows like the idols themselves have so like no power. In fact, I think and this is what I want to ask if I'm going too far, but part of the story that helps us understand how God is redeeming, even through the brokenness and the messiness of it, is when it says that God sees. When God sees his people, he works on their behalf. The blessing happens in the earth. It expands. So we have this moment where Laban is looking for his idols and he cannot see them. The only power in an idol is if there's a line of sight by the worshiper. And I almost wonder if not only the problem of idolatry is being hinted at, but the futility of idolatry is being just subtly, it's imagery, right? And it sits and it's not named or called out. But do you think that's possible?
Definitely possible. I mean, I haven't looked at the Hebrew on this, but if the same word pops up in two places, the Hebrew language for the Old Testament people of God was very meaningful and impactful to the meaning of the text itself. And so
That's right.
oftentimes you'd find these functions where in the Hebrew text they would use alliterations or words that rhymed, or there'd be a pacing or a sequence to the words that what it would do is it would draw the hearer to places in the text that you wouldn't necessarily go immediately if you were reading it. Yep. So I think this is absolutely one of those things that it could be. Again, without having the Hebrew text in front of me, I don't know. But if the same word is popping up in two different places, maybe there's a connection.
Yeah, I would think. I don't think it's the same word necessarily, but maybe like a similar kind of image. But this is a big brain moment with Brad going to the Hebrew text. Which, no, you're absolutely right. That's how we would want to approach that.
Yeah.
Better than speculation. Go to the text.
Yeah. So anyway, there's that connected to it.
Yes.
All right. Connected to the idols. We only have a couple minutes until our machine's going to kick us off. One of my observations here in verse 42 of chapter 31, if the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night. So this is Jacob kind of offering some insight into Laban, to what Laban was planning. And God had come and he spoke to Laban and said, hey, don't do the thing that you want to do. Let him go.
Yes.
But this phrase, the God of my father, the God of Abraham, the fear of Isaac, I want to talk about that a little bit because again, with Moses in the burning bush, that's the language. Who should I say sent me, right? And God, Yahweh, responds, right? Well, I am who I am. That's how we translated, but basically God and the God who is in relationship and has been in relationship with your forefathers.
Yeah.
That seems to be pretty powerful. And we see that phraseology kind of come back many times throughout the first 5 books of the Bible. So yeah, you want to speak to that a little bit?
I do find it interesting, and I'm glad you pointed to it. The ESV chooses to capitalize the word fear, fear of Isaac, as a title. I don't know how deep I can go on this one, to be honest. It's not a feature that I focused on much. I do think that later on in like Proverbs, when we read about the fear of the Lord as the beginning of wisdom, this would be an appropriate place to do the same kind of work with words that you just talked about and understand like it's not just a concept. It's not philosophy. It's also it's experience, right? And this is what theology is like where heaven meets earth and vice versa. It's interesting to me that Jacob is processing his father's story, his father's Yahweh story in those words. Again, we're not given a whole lot on Isaac. So I wonder if that means that Isaac lived with some sort of reverence for Yahweh that was well known, or maybe a trembling. I mean, Isaac was offered up on an altar at one point. Like it may have been more of a traumatic and terrifying kind of thing that he carried. So what do you think Jacob's getting at here?
Yeah, I don't know. With the word fear, it does seem there's a reverential fear that Isaac possibly was known for, that, within this family that isn't communicated in the text to us,
Yes.
3,000 years later.
Yes.
I also think that throughout the Old Testament, especially, we have seen God as someone who can strike fear in others.
Yeah.
You think of like the reaction of Abimelech, for instance, to draw on something. So I don't know. I think there's something that's being said there, but I also think that, again, who is this written to? It's written to a people who are connected to a family, who are connected to a history, who are connected to stories, and anything that Jacob, anything that those people can be reassured of or reminded of, that's good. God is somebody who is shown to be faithful. God is somebody who is shown to walk with. God has shown to be somebody who fulfills the things that he promises. Yeah. And Laban is somebody who doesn't worship God.
Right.
And so there is this insider-outsider dynamic happening where, this is on the tails of the household idols and, the household gods that Laban worshipped. And so there's almost this, I think, a recognition or a separation or a boundary that's being drawn of this is who I am. This is how this interacts and impacts your story here. Yeah. But there is a difference between you and I. Yeah. And that's why I need to leave.
Yeah. How much time do we have?
We have a minute.
1 minute.
So probably less than a minute.
Here's 20 seconds.
Yeah.
The word fear in the Bible is a really interesting one for modern readers to read, especially American readers, I think. We do many, many things to eliminate and minimize fear. Fear is a very bad concept in our world. However, I'm not saying that it's a positive concept in Scripture, but it's more of a neutral thing. There's a reason to pause and take notice, and the question is, what is the reader going to do with it? What is the worshiper going to do with the fear of Yahweh?
That's a great question for us to end with. What are you going to do with your fear of Yahweh? Well, thank you for joining us for this week's Deep Dive. You can find this resource and more on our website, calvary.church/resources. For more information on this particular series, calvary.church/relationship series. And if you have a question, we'd love to interact with some of those in a future episode. Email podcast@calvary.church. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you again next week.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive, a Calvary Church Media Productions podcast. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts.